close your eyes and let your mind drift to a time before time, when the world was young and the stars whispered secrets to those who knew how to listen. Tonight, we journey together into the heart of ancient Maya, where jade temples pierce misty jungle canopies and the night sky holds stories older than memory itself. The warm air carries the scent of copal incense and blooming cecropia, while somewhere in the distance, howler monkeys call across the darkness like voices from another world. Beneath these same constellations, Maya scribes once carved hieroglyphs into limestone, preserving sacred knowledge that would survive the collapse of cities, the burning of books, and the passage of 1,000 years. In quiet moments like this, when the modern world grows still, we can almost hear the echo of ancient voices, gathered around fires of okat pine, sharing the most precious gift humanity has ever known, the gift of story. The book we explore tonight is called the Popol Vuh, which means the Book of the People, or the Book of the Community. But this is no ordinary book. Written in the highlands of Guatemala, centuries after the Spanish conquest, it preserves creation myths that may be as old as agriculture itself, passed down through generations of Maya daykeepers and Kanab, the keepers of time and sacred knowledge. The Popol Vuh is both a creation story and a meditation on what it means to be human, what it means to belong to the earth, and what it means to find our place in the vast wheel of time. As we settle into this ancient narrative, imagine yourself not as a distant observer, but as a member of that community, sitting in the flickering light of a ceremonial fire, while the jungle breathes around you. The storyteller's voice rises and falls like wind through cecropia leaves, weaving together myth and meaning, dream and truth. These are not just stories about gods and heroes. They are stories about us, about the eternal human struggle to understand our origins, our purpose, and our connection to the sacred patterns that govern all life. The Maya understood something we have perhaps forgotten in our hurried modern lives, that stories are living things, that they change us as we listen to them, that they plant seeds in the rich soil of our dreams. Tonight, let these ancient seeds take root as we journey from the silence before creation to the first dawn of the world. From the trials of divine twins to the sacred birth of humanity itself. Let the rhythm of this telling carry you like a river carries leaves, deeper into mystery, deeper into peace, deeper into the timeless realm where all stories begin. And so, with the patience of the ancient ones and the wonder of a child hearing these tales for the first time, we begin our descent into the Popol Vuh, where creation and destruction dance together in an eternal spiral, and where the very essence of what makes us human lies waiting to be discovered once again. In the beginning, before the first sunrise painted the sky with colors that had no names, there was only stillness. The Popol Vuh tells us that in those first moments before creation, there was only the sea, calm and alone, and above it, the sky, empty and vast. There were no mountains rising like sleeping giants from the earth, no rivers carving their ancient pathways through stone, no forests whispering their green secrets to the wind. There was only potential, like a seed containing an entire jungle, waiting for the proper moment to unfold. In this primordial quiet, the creators waited beings of such immense wisdom and power that the Maya knew them by many names. There was Tipu, the sovereign, whose thoughts could reshape reality itself. There was Gukamats, the feathered serpent, who moved like wind across the waters, and whose very breath contained the spark of life. These were not gods as we might imagine them, distant and removed from creation, but rather cosmic forces so deeply connected to the world they were about to create that they would become part of its very fabric. The Popol Vuh tells us that these creators came together in council, their voices joining in a conversation that would echo through eternity. What shall we do so that there will be light, so that there will be dawn? They asked each other, their words rippling across the still waters, like stones dropped into a perfectly calm serenity. Who will be the providers, the nurturers? Who will honor us, remember us, call upon us when the rain is late or the harvest poor? And so, with the patience of mountains and the precision of master craftsmen, the creators began to speak the world into existence. Earth, they said, and the seafloor trembled and rose, forming the first dry land. Mountains, they whispered, and great peaks thrust upward, their summits reaching toward the empty sky like fingers grasping for stars. Valleys, they breathed, and the earth folded itself into gentle hollows where water could gather and life could take root. But the earth, though beautiful, was silent. The creators looked upon their work and saw that it was incomplete, like a magnificent temple without worshippers, like a song without singers. Let there be animals, they declared, and suddenly the world filled with movement and sound. Jaguars padded through shadows on silent paws, their spotted coats dappled with light and darkness. Quetzal birds soared between the trees, their emerald feathers catching the first gleams of sunlight. Serpents coiled around branches like living jade, and deer stepped delicately through clearings, their eyes wide and alert. To each creature, the creators gave a voice and a purpose. You, jaguar, shall be the guardian of the night, they said. You, Quetzal, shall carry messages between earth and sky. You, serpent, shall remind all living things of the wisdom found in patience and the power found in transformation. The animals accepted these gifts gladly, but when the creators asked them to speak words of gratitude, to remember and honor their makers, the creatures could only roar and chirp and hiss according to their natures. This was beautiful, the creators acknowledged, but not what they sought. They wanted beings who could understand the mystery of existence, who could look up at the stars and wonder about their meaning, who could plant seeds and trust in the future, who could gather around fires and share stories that would keep the sacred knowledge alive. They wanted beings who could participate consciously in the great dance of creation. And so began the first attempt to create humanity, a trial that would teach the creators as much about the nature of consciousness as about the art of making life, with the same care they had used to shape mountains and valleys. They gathered mud from the riverbanks and began to mold it into human form. Their hands, which had scattered stars across the heavens, now worked on a smaller scale, forming limbs and features, breathing intention into clay. But mud, for all its plasticity and potential, lacks the spark of permanence. When the rains came, these first humans began to dissolve, their carefully crafted faces softening and melting back into the earth from which they had been formed. They could not walk steadily or think clearly. Their vision was clouded, their speech unclear. When they tried to look up at their creators with gratitude, their heads simply crumbled, returning to the soil like flowers at the end of their season. The creators, rather than feeling discouraged, recognized this as part of the learning that creation requires. Like master artisans refining their technique, they considered what had gone wrong and what might be tried next. Mud was too soft, too temporary. They needed something with more structure, more resilience. Looking around at their creation, they noticed the trees, strong, enduring, reaching both deep into the earth and high into the sky. Wood might provide the stability that mud had lacked. With renewed purpose, they carved the second humans from the heartwood of trees, shaping them with the precision of master sculptors. These wooden people were indeed more durable than their mud predecessors. They could walk without dissolving, speak without their words turning to whispers, build houses and have children, and create the beginnings of civilization. For a time, it seemed that the creators had succeeded in their purpose. But as generations passed, something essential was missing from these wooden humans. They had forgotten their creators, living as if they had made themselves, as if the world existed solely for their benefit. They cut down forests without gratitude, killed animals without ceremony, used the gifts of the earth without acknowledgement or reciprocity. Their hearts were dry as the wood from which they had been carved, unable to feel the deep connections that bind all life together. Most troubling of all, they could not truly see. Though their eyes functioned well enough for daily tasks, they were blind to the sacred dimension of existence. They could not see the spirits that dwelt in every tree and stone, could not perceive the threads of relationship that connected them to all other beings, could not recognize the divine spark that animated the world around them. They lived in a universe full of wonder, but could perceive only its surface, like beings who had lost the ability to dream. The creators watched with growing concern as these wooden people multiplied across the earth, taking without giving, consuming without gratitude, existing without awareness of their place in the greater web of life. Their failure was not simply moral, but ontological. They had lost touch with the very essence of what it means to be human. They were like musical instruments that could no longer make music, like mirrors that had lost the ability to reflect light. And so, with the sadness that comes from necessity, the creators decided to end this second attempt at humanity. But rather than simply unmaking the wooden people as they had allowed the mud people to dissolve, they called upon the world itself to reclaim these ungrateful children. The sky grew dark, not with the gentle darkness of night, but with the terrible darkness of judgment. Rain began to fall, but it was not the life-giving rain that nourishes crops and fills cenotes. This was the rain of undoing, of return, of cosmic correction. From every direction, the abused elements of creation rose up against the wooden people. The animals they had killed without ceremony came back to seek justice. The tools they had used without gratitude turned against them. Grinding stones ground their makers. Cooking pots boiled those who had once boiled water in them. Dogs who had been beaten took revenge on their former masters. Even the houses they had built collapsed inward, refusing to shelter those who had shown no shelter to others. Some of the wooden people fled to the trees, where they were transformed into the monkeys we see today, their faces still bearing the resemblance to humanity, but their consciousness forever changed. In Maya tradition, these monkeys serve as a reminder of what we might become if we forget our connection to the sacred, if we lose our capacity for gratitude and reciprocity. When howler monkeys call through the forest at dawn and dusk, some say they are still trying to remember the prayers their ancestors forgot to say. But the creators were not finished. Each failed attempt had taught them something crucial about the nature of consciousness and the requirements for authentic humanity. Mud was too impermanent, wood too rigid. What they needed was something that could be both durable and responsive, something that carried within it the essence of life itself, something sacred. As they contemplated this challenge, their attention was drawn to a plant that had been growing quietly in their creation all along. A plant so essential to life that the Maya would later say it was more precious than jade or gold. This was Ixim maize corn, the golden grain that would become the foundation not just of Maya cuisine, but of Maya spirituality itself. In the tall stalks swaying in temple courtyards, in the kernels that fed both body and soul, the creators recognized the substance they had been seeking all along. Maize was different from mud and wood in ways both practical and mystical. It grew from the earth, but reached toward the sky. It provided sustenance, but required cultivation, creating a relationship of mutual dependence between plant and tender. Most importantly, maize contained within its golden kernels the essence of the sun itself, stored sunshine that could nourish both physical bodies and spiritual awareness. It was, the Maya understood, a gift from the cosmos, a bridge between the earthly and the divine. The creation of humanity from maize was not a simple act of molding, as it had been with mud and wood. Instead, the creators approached this third attempt with all the reverence due to a sacred ritual. They gathered the finest ears of corn, white maize and yellow maize, the colors of dawn and sunlight, of bone and gold, of the lunar and solar principles that govern all life. 4 ears they chose, for 4 is the sacred number of completion, the number of directions, seasons, and the corners of the cosmos. With infinite care, they ground this sacred maize into the finest meal, mixing it with water that had been blessed by their breath, water that carried within it the memory of the first seas and the promise of all the rains to come. As they worked, their hands moved with the rhythm of the seasons, with the patience of farmers who know that the best harvests cannot be rushed. The dough they created was neither too wet nor too dry, neither too soft nor too rigid, but perfectly balanced, like the equilibrium that maintains the dance between earth and sky. From this blessed mixture, the creators shaped the bodies of the first true humans, but their work went far deeper than the formation of limbs and features. Into the maize dough they wove consciousness itself, the ability to perceive, not just with the eyes, but with the heart, not just the surface of things, but their sacred essence. They gave these new humans the gift of memory, so they could remember their origins and their obligations. They gave them the gift of imagination, so they could envision possibilities beyond their immediate circumstances. Most precious of all, they gave them the gift of gratitude, the capacity to recognize the interconnectedness of all life and to live in proper relationship with the world that sustained them. When the creators looked upon these humans made of maize, they saw that their work was finally complete. These new beings could see clearly, not just the physical world, but the spiritual forces that animated it. They could speak eloquently, offering prayers and songs that rose like incense to honor their makers. They could think deeply, understanding their place in the great web of relationships that connected all things. Most importantly, they could love. Love for their creators, love for the earth that sustained them, love for each other, and love for the sacred mystery of existence itself. But even in this moment of triumph, the creators recognized a potential problem. These humans were perhaps too perfect, their vision too clear, their understanding too complete. They could see as far as the creators themselves could perceive the hidden workings of the cosmos with disturbing clarity. Such perfect knowledge might lead to pride, to the same forgetting that had doomed the wooden people. Perfect beings might feel no need for the humility that keeps us connected to the sacred. And so, in an act of loving wisdom, the creators breathed a gentle mist across the eyes of the first humans, clouding their vision just enough to preserve mystery, to ensure that knowledge would always be balanced by wonder, understanding by humility. This mist, which might seem like a limitation, was actually a gift, the gift of the unknown, the assurance that life would always hold surprises, that there would always be more to discover, more to learn, more to appreciate. Thus were born the first 4 men and the first 4 women, the ancestors of all Maya people and, in a deeper sense, the archetypes of all humanity. They were people of the corn, children of the earth and sky, beings capable of both understanding and wonder, knowledge and humility, gratitude and growth. In their veins flowed the essence of the sun, stored in golden kernels and transformed by the mysterious alchemy of consciousness into the capacity for awareness, relationship, and reverence. As these first humans awakened to the world that had been prepared for them, they found themselves in a creation that was both familiar and full of mystery. The same forces that had shaped them continued to work in the world around them. The same sacred patterns that governed their work, consciousness, also governed the movements of planets and seasons. The same divine intention that had brought them into being continued to unfold in every sunrise and rainfall, every sprouting seed and falling leaf. This understanding of humanity as fundamentally connected to the natural world, as literally made from the same substance that feeds us, profoundly shaped Maya spirituality and continues to influence indigenous communities throughout Mesoamerica today. To be human, in this view, is to be a conscious participant in the ongoing creation of the world, to be both grateful recipients of the earth's gifts and responsible stewards of its well-being. But the story of creation was not complete with the making of humanity. The cosmos still required order, rhythm, the predictable cycles that would allow life to flourish and consciousness to develop. The world needed light and darkness, seasons and weather, the great wheel of time that would measure planting and harvest, birth and death, the endless spiral of renewal that keeps the universe in motion. And so, as the last mists of creation settled over the newly formed earth, the gods began the delicate work of bringing order to the cosmos, of establishing the great cycles that would govern all existence, of setting in motion the dance between light and darkness that would define the rhythm of life itself. The stage was set for the next movement in this vast symphony of creation, the birth of the sun and moon, the establishment of the sacred calendar, and the emergence of the cosmic forces that would shape the destiny of the maize people and all their descendants. In the gentle light of this first dawn, as the creators looked upon their work and saw that it was good, the real adventure was just beginning. For creation, the Maya understood, is not a single act, but an ongoing process. Not a finished product, but a living relationship between conscious beings and the sacred forces that sustain them. The story of the Popol Vuh, like the story of existence itself, was ready to unfold into ever more complex and beautiful patterns, each chapter revealing new depths of meaning, new reasons for wonder, new invitations to participate consciously in the great mystery of being alive. The gods who had shaped the earth and created humanity now turned their attention to the most crucial task of all, bringing light to the world. For what good are eyes that can see if there is no light to see by? What purpose do consciousness and gratitude serve in a world trapped in eternal darkness? The cosmos needed rhythms, cycles, the great dance between day and night that would provide the framework within which all life could flourish. In those first moments after the creation of the maize people, the world existed in a strange twilight, neither fully dark nor fully light. It was as if the universe was holding its breath, waiting for something momentous to occur. The new humans could see, but dimly. They could move, but uncertainly. They could speak, but their voices seemed muffled by the ambient grayness that surrounded everything. Creation was poised on the threshold of a new phase, ready for the birth of true illumination. The gods gathered once again in council, their voices joining in harmonies that resonated through every level of existence. They knew that the creation of light could not be arbitrary or chaotic. Light needed to be balanced by darkness, activity by rest, warmth by coolness. The cosmos required not just illumination but rhythm, not just brightness but the profound peace that comes with the regular alternation of day and night. From their cosmic perspective, the creators could see the pattern that needed to emerge, a great wheel of time that would govern not just the daily cycle of sunrise and sunset, but the larger rhythms of seasons and years, the complex calendrical cycles that would allow conscious beings to plan and plant and harvest, to celebrate and remember, to mark the passages of their lives against the backdrop of celestial time. And so they began to fashion the great lights that would govern the heavens. For the sun they chose the most radiant materials in their cosmic workshop: gold from the deep places of the earth, fire from the hearts of volcanoes, the concentrated essence of every flower that had ever turned its face toward the sky seeking light. They formed these materials into an orb of such perfect brilliance that even the gods had to shield their eyes as they worked. A sphere that contained within itself the power to awaken seeds, warm the blood of all living creatures, and drive away the shadows that hide fear and confusion. But the sun, for all its power and glory, could not rule alone. Constant day would be as destructive as constant night, bringing withering heat and endless activity that would exhaust both body and spirit. The cosmos needed gentleness as well as power, coolness as well as warmth, the soft, silver light that encourages contemplation and rest, that soothes the harsh edges of daily struggle and opens the mind to dreams and visions. For the moon, the creators chose different but equally sacred materials: silver from mountain streams, pearl from the depths of secret cenotes, the luminous essence of night-blooming flowers, and the wisdom that comes to those who know how to listen in silence. They shaped these materials into an orb of subtle beauty, a light that would illuminate, without overwhelming guide, without commanding. A celestial companion that would wax and wane in cycles, that would teach all living things about the natural rhythms of growth and rest, fullness and emptiness, the eternal dance between being and becoming, as the sun and moon took their places in the heavens. Their first rising and setting established the fundamental rhythm that would govern all subsequent existence. The sun rose in the east with a fanfare of colors that had never before painted the sky: deep magentas and golden oranges, rose and amber, and the clear blue that would become the standard against which all other blues would be measured. Its light flooded across the landscape, revealing details that had been hidden in the twilight, bringing warmth that stirred the sap in trees and set birds to singing their first songs of celebration. The effect on the newly created humans was immediate and profound. Colors they had never seen blazed into existence around them. The green of leaves became vibrant and varied, the pale green of new growth, the deep green of mature foliage, the silver green of leaves touched by morning dew. Flowers revealed petals of yellow and red and purple, each hue carrying its own emotional resonance, its own symbolic meaning that would become part of the rich vocabulary of Maya art and ceremony. But perhaps most importantly, the light of the sun revealed the intricate connections that linked all living things. In the twilight, the first humans had been aware of other creatures, but had not fully understood their relationships to them. Now, in the clear light of day, they could see the paths worn by deer between feeding grounds, the flight patterns of birds, carrying seeds from tree to tree, the complex underground networks of roots that allowed forests to share nutrients and information. They began to understand that they were not isolated beings, but participants in a vast community of life, each member dependent on all the others. As the day progressed and the sun began its journey toward the western horizon, the humans experienced their first sunset, watching in wonder as the great light seemed to descend into the earth, painting the sky with colors that shifted and changed moment by moment. Fear might have gripped their hearts at this first apparent disappearance of the light. But the creators had woven wisdom into their consciousness, and they somehow understood that this was not an ending, but a transformation, not a loss, but a necessary pause in the great rhythm of existence. When darkness finally settled over the world, it was not the empty darkness that had existed before creation, but a rich, living darkness full of subtle sounds and mysterious presences. And then, in the depth of this darkness, the moon began to rise, its silver light revealing a different aspect of the same world they had known in daylight. Colors became muted, but not absent, reduced to subtle gradations of silver and gray and deep blue that had their own beauty, their own peaceful energy. In the moonlight, the humans discovered the pleasure of rest, the deep satisfaction that comes from allowing the body to be still, while the mind processes the experiences of the day. They found that, in the gentleness of lunar illumination, thoughts moved more slowly and went deeper, touching places in consciousness that the bright activity of day did not reach. Dreams began to visit them, carrying messages and visions that would become an essential part of their relationship with the divine realm. But the creators were not content to establish only the basic rhythm of day and night. They understood that consciousness requires more complex patterns, that the human soul needs variety and change within the broader framework of regularity. And so they began to populate the heavens with the countless other lights that would provide navigation for both body and spirit. The star patterns that would guide travelers, mark the seasons, and serve as a celestial calendar for ceremony and agriculture. Each constellation they placed in the heavens carried its own story, its own spiritual significance. There was the great turtle, whose shell represented the earth floating in the primordial sea. There was the cosmic tree, whose roots reached into the underworld, and whose branches supported the heavens. There were the patterns that marked the movement of the feathered serpent across the sky, the celestial paths followed by gods and heroes, the stellar configurations that would tell the Maya when to plant their corn and when to conduct their most sacred ceremonies. Venus, the morning and evening star, received special attention from the creators. This brilliant planet, which appeared to die and be reborn in regular cycles, became associated with the themes of death and resurrection that would play such a crucial role in Maya mythology. Its movements across the sky provided a calendar for warfare and diplomacy, for ceremonies of renewal and transformation, for all the activities that required divine timing and cosmic approval. As the celestial patterns established themselves and the first humans learned to read the messages written in starlight, a new kind of consciousness began to emerge on Earth. This was not just awareness of the immediate environment, but cosmic consciousness, an understanding of humanity's place in the vast scales of space and time. The humans began to see themselves as participants in a cosmic drama, players in a story so large that it encompassed not just their individual lives, but the destiny of all creation. This cosmic perspective profoundly influenced how the Maya understood their daily activities and social relationships. Agriculture became not just a means of survival, but a sacred collaboration with the forces that governed fertility and growth. The planting of corn was timed to celestial events, and the growth of the crop was seen as a reflection of cosmic harmony. When the rains came at the proper time and the harvest was abundant, it was understood as evidence that the community was living in right relationship with the divine forces that governed the world. Similarly, political and social organization reflected cosmic patterns. Maya rulers were not just temporal leaders, but earthly representatives of celestial powers, responsible for maintaining the proper relationships between human society and the divine realm. Architecture reflected astronomical alignments, with temples and pyramids positioned to mark important celestial events. Art and sculpture incorporated cosmic symbolism, using visual language to express spiritual truths that could not be captured in words alone. The calendar systems that emerged from this cosmic consciousness were among the most sophisticated in human history, combining multiple cycles of different lengths to create a complex temporal framework that could track everything from the practical rhythms of daily life to the vast cycles of cosmic time that encompassed the creation and destruction of entire world ages. These calendars were not just tools for organization, but spiritual technologies, ways of staying aligned with the sacred patterns that governed all existence. But perhaps most importantly, the establishment of celestial order created the conditions necessary for the emergence of those figures who would become the central heroes of Maya mythology, beings capable of traveling between the different levels of the cosmos, of confronting the forces of chaos and darkness, of serving as bridges between the human and divine realms. The stage was now set for the epic adventures that would test the very foundations of cosmic order and ultimately ensure the survival of the world itself. As the great wheel of time began its eternal turning, marked by the movements of sun and moon and stars, as the first humans learned to live in harmony with the cosmic rhythms, as the creators looked upon their work and saw that the foundation of all future existence had been properly laid, the deeper mysteries of the Popol Vuh began to unfold. For creation was not a single event, but an ongoing process, not a finished product, but a living relationship that would be tested and renewed by each generation of conscious beings. The cosmic order that had been established was beautiful and harmonious, but it was not unchallenged. In the depths of the earth, in the dark places where chaos still held sway, forces of dissolution and death plotted against the light. The great drama of existence was about to enter its most crucial phase, as heroes would arise to defend the light against the darkness, to ensure that the cosmic order would survive its greatest tests, and to demonstrate that consciousness and courage could triumph over even the most powerful forces of destruction and despair. In the peaceful rhythms of these first days and nights, as humans learned to read the messages written in starlight and to live in harmony with the great cycles of cosmic time, the seeds of future adventures were already beginning to germinate. The stage was set for the emergence of heroes whose courage and cleverness would become the foundation of hope for all future generations, whose stories would remind humanity forever that no darkness is so deep that it cannot be penetrated by light, no challenge so great that it cannot be overcome by wisdom and determination, working in harmony with the sacred forces that govern all existence. In the time when the cosmic order was still young and the patterns of day and night were newly established, when humans were learning to live in harmony with the celestial rhythms that would guide all their future generations, there were born two brothers whose destinies would become intertwined with the very foundations of existence itself. Their names were Hun and Vukub, and they possessed skills and passions that would ultimately lead them into the deepest mysteries of life and death, triumph and tragedy, heroism and sacrifice. These brothers were not ordinary men, though they walked the earth in human form and shared the daily concerns of their communities. In their veins flowed the essence of the divine, inherited from ancestors who had witnessed the first dawn and learned the sacred songs that keep the world in harmony. They possessed the keen intelligence that comes from understanding cosmic patterns, the physical grace that reflects inner balance, and above all, an irrepressible joy in competition and play that would prove both their greatest strength and their ultimate undoing. Of all the games and sports that occupied the leisure time of their people, none captured the imagination and passion of the brothers, like the sacred ball game that was played in courts throughout the Maya lands. This was not merely entertainment, but a cosmic ritual, a reenactment of the eternal struggle between the forces of light and darkness, order and chaos, life and death, that played out on scales both vast and intimate throughout the universe. The ball court itself was designed as a model of the cosmos, its sloping walls representing the boundaries between different levels of existence, its narrow playing field symbolizing the precarious path that all conscious beings must walk between opposing forces. The rubber ball that bounded back and forth between the players carried within its movements the dance of celestial bodies, the rhythm of seasons, the pulse of life itself. To play this game well required not just physical skill, but spiritual awareness, an understanding of the sacred patterns that governed all motion and all change. Hun and Vukub had devoted themselves to mastering this cosmic game with an intensity that bordered on obsession. Day after day, they could be found in the ball court, their bodies moving with the fluid precision of dancers, their minds calculating angles and velocities with the accuracy of astronomers. The sound of the rubber ball striking the walls of the court echoed across the landscape like thunder, announcing to all within hearing that the brothers were once again engaged in their passionate pursuit of perfection. Their skill was legendary throughout the region. Challengers came from distant cities, hoping to test themselves against the brothers, only to return home with tales of impossible plays and supernatural coordination. The brothers seemed to move as one consciousness divided into two bodies, anticipating each other's actions with uncanny precision, responding to the ball's movements as if they could see the future trajectory of every bounce and ricochet. But their excellence in the ball game was more than mere athletic achievement. Through their play, they were unconsciously rehearsing the great cosmic dramas that would soon engulf them, preparing their bodies and spirits for challenges that would test not just their skill, but their very understanding of what it means to be alive, to be conscious, to be connected to the sacred forces that sustain all existence. The intensity of their play, the thunderous echoes that rolled across the landscape whenever they engaged in their cosmic competition, did not go unnoticed by all who dwelt in the various levels of the universe. Deep beneath the earth, in the realm called Xibalba, the place of fright, the lords of the underworld were growing increasingly irritated by the disturbance that interrupted their dark meditations and sinister counsels. Xibalba was not simply a place of the dead, but a realm of active malevolence, ruled by beings whose very existence depended on spreading fear, confusion, and despair throughout the cosmos. These lords had names that struck terror into the hearts of all who heard them. One Death and Seven Death, the primary rulers, whose word was law in the underworld, and their terrible servants, with names like Scab, Stripper, and Bloodgatherer Wing, and Packstrap Demon of Pus, and Demon of Jaundice, beings whose very presence brought disease and suffering to any realm they visited. The lords of Xibalba had grown accustomed to the fear and respect that their reputation commanded throughout the cosmos. The sound of their names, whispered in the wind, was enough to make even the bravest warriors tremble, and the thought of their dark realm served as a warning to all who might be tempted to challenge the established order of things. They were powers of entropy and dissolution, forces that worked to unmake the careful patterns that the creators had woven into the fabric of existence. But the joyous thunder of the ballgame, the celebration of skill and life and cosmic harmony that echoed from the brothers' court, was an affront to everything that Xibalba represented. Here were mortal beings who seemed unaware of the proper fear that should govern all relationships with the powers of darkness. Here were players who treated the most sacred cosmic patterns as the subject of a game, who found joy and meaning in activities that should have filled them with terror and uncertainty. The lords of Xibalba gathered in their council chamber, a place where shadows had weight, and whispers could kill, where the very air carried the essence of despair, and the walls wept tears of blood. Their discussion was conducted in voices like the grinding of millstones, like the sound of bones breaking, like the last breath escaping from dying lungs. These mortals mock us with their noise, hissed one Death, his words forming visible clouds of corruption in the stagnant air. They play their games as if death were nothing, as if the underworld held no terrors for them. Their very joy is an insult to our power, agreed Seven Death, his voice like the sound of earth falling into an open grave. They must be taught the proper respect for those who rule over endings and dissolution. The other lords murmured their agreement, their terrible names rippling through the darkness like curses seeking targets. It was decided that the brothers must be summoned to Xibalba, must be taught the proper relationship between mortality and the powers of death, must be shown that no amount of skill or joy or cosmic harmony could protect them from the ultimate dominion of darkness. But the lords of Xibalba were cunning as well as cruel. They understood that the brothers might not come willingly to the underworld, might suspect treachery in any direct invitation to visit the realm of the dead. Instead, they would use deception, would present their summons as a challenge, an invitation to play the ball game in the most prestigious court of all, the ball court of Xibalba itself. They crafted their message carefully, wrapping their malevolent intentions in language that would appeal to the brothers' pride and competitive spirit. They spoke of having heard rumors of the brothers' skill, of being impressed by reports of their prowess. of wanting to test their own abilities against players who had achieved such remarkable reputation. They mentioned games of cosmic significance, matches that would determine not just individual victory, but the proper order of things throughout the universe. The message was delivered by creatures of shadow and nightmare, beings who could travel between the levels of existence as easily as birds fly between trees. These messengers appeared to the brothers in the form of owls, but owls whose eyes held depths of darkness that belonged to no earthly bird, whose voices carried harmonics that seemed to come from beneath the earth, whose very presence made the air around them grow cold and heavy with foreboding. When the brothers received this invitation, they felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension. Here was the ultimate challenge, the chance to test their skills in the most dangerous and prestigious arena in all the cosmos. Their reputation had apparently spread even to the underworld, and the lords of Xibalba were offering them recognition that no mortal players had ever received before. Yet something in the manner of the invitation troubled them. The owl messengers had delivered their words correctly, but their eyes had held a malice that seemed inconsistent with genuine sporting challenge. The invitation itself was phrased with a formality that suggested ritual rather than play, ceremony rather than competition. And there were subtle threats woven into the language, implications that refusal would be interpreted as cowardice, that their reputation would be destroyed if they failed to accept this cosmic challenge. Hun and Vukub were not lacking in wisdom, but they were young and proud and deeply committed to their vision of themselves as players worthy of any challenge. The very danger of the invitation made it more appealing rather than less, confirming their sense of their own importance in the cosmic scheme of things. They convinced themselves that their skill was sufficient protection against any treachery, that their understanding of cosmic patterns would allow them to navigate whatever challenges the underworld might present. And so, with the tragic confidence that has led so many heroes into darkness, they accepted the invitation from the lords of Xibalba. They prepared their equipment with extra care, selecting their finest rubber ball, their most reliable protective gear, spending long hours in practice and meditation to ensure that they would be ready for whatever form of ball game awaited them in the underworld. They spoke their farewells to family and friends with the casual confidence of players heading to just another competition, promising to return with stories of their victories in the most exotic court they had ever visited. They spoke of the honor that would accrue to their community from having produced players skilled enough to compete in Xibalba itself, of the respect that would be shown to all their people once word spread of their triumphs in the underworld. But their mother, blessed with the intuition that comes to those who have lived long enough to recognize the difference between confidence and hubris, felt a deep unease as she watched her sons prepare for their journey. She begged them to reconsider, to send messengers explaining that pressing duties prevented them from accepting the invitation immediately, to take time to consult with the wise elders who might provide guidance for such an unprecedented undertaking. The brothers, however, were too caught up in their excitement and anticipation to heed these warnings. They assured their mother that their skills were more than adequate for any challenge, that their understanding of cosmic principles would protect them from harm, that their return would bring honor to all their ancestors and all their descendants. And so, on a morning when the sun seemed to rise with unusual reluctance and the very birds seemed to sing with muted voices, Hun and Vukub set out on the path that would lead them down through the layers of existence to the realm of Xibalba. They traveled with the confident stride of champions, their equipment carefully arranged, their spirits high with anticipation of the cosmic competition that awaited them. They could not know that they were walking into a trap more cunningly designed than any snare ever set for earthly prey, that their very excellence at the game they loved had marked them for destruction by powers that saw joy itself as a form of rebellion against the proper order of things. They could not foresee that their journey would become a descent, not just through physical space, but through the deepest mysteries of existence itself. A passage that would transform them from confident players into sacrificial heroes whose fate would determine the destiny of all future generations. As they disappeared into the shadows of the forest path that led toward the underworld, the sun seemed to dim, and the very air grew heavy with foreboding. The stage was set for a confrontation between the forces of life and death, joy and despair, creative play and destructive power that would shake the foundations of the cosmos and establish patterns that would echo through all subsequent time. The journey to Xibalba began like any other travel through familiar territory, with the brothers following well-known paths through forests where every tree and stream held memories of childhood adventures. But as they progressed further from the lands of their birth, the landscape began to change in subtle but troubling ways. Colors seemed less vivid, sounds became muffled and strange, and the very air carried an quality of heaviness that made each breath feel labored and uncertain. The path itself began to slope downward more steeply than seemed natural, leading them through landscapes that belonged to no earthly geography. They passed through valleys where no birds sang, crossed streams whose waters ran black and cold, walked beneath trees whose leaves rustled with whispers in languages they could not understand. The familiar rhythms of day and night began to blur and distort, replaced by a twilight that seemed to last forever. Neither fully dark nor fully light, but caught in an eternal moment of uncertainty and transition. As they descended deeper into this strange territory, the brothers encountered the first of the trials that would test not just their physical skills, but their understanding of the true nature of existence. They came to a place where 4 roads intersected, each leading in a different direction, each presenting a different aspect of the cosmic forces they would soon confront. One road was red as blood, pulsing with a heat that suggested violence and passion, conflict, and the raw energy of life asserting itself against all obstacles. Another was black as the deepest night, radiating a cold that seemed to drain warmth. The third road was white as bone, gleaming with a purity that was somehow terrifying in its perfection, suggesting truths too absolute for mortal minds to comprehend. The fourth road was yellow as corn, as gold, as the sun itself, offering familiarity and comfort, but perhaps leading nowhere but back to the beginning. The brothers stood at this crossroads for a long time, understanding intuitively that their choice would determine not just their immediate direction, but the entire nature of their encounter with the underworld. Each road called 2 different aspects of their nature, different understandings of what it might mean to be heroes confronting the ultimate challenges of existence. In the end, they chose the black road, drawn perhaps by their unconscious recognition that their journey was fundamentally about confronting death and darkness, about discovering what lay beyond the comfortable patterns of earthly existence. As soon as their feet touched this path, they felt a change in the very fabric of reality around them. The air grew colder and heavier, The light dimmed to a gray twilight that seemed to come from no particular source, and sounds became distorted in ways that made their own footsteps sound like the approach of strangers. The black road led them deeper and deeper into the underworld, through landscapes of increasing strangeness and menace. They passed rivers that ran uphill, forests where the trees grew downward with their roots reaching toward a sky that held no sun. Clearings where flowers bloomed in impossible colors that had no names in any earthly language. The very ground beneath their feet seemed to shift and change, sometimes solid stone, sometimes yielding earth, sometimes surfaces that felt like nothing they had ever experienced before. Finally, after what seemed like days of travel, but might have been moments or centuries, time itself seemed to follow different rules in this realm. They arrived at the court of the lords of Xibalba. The sight that greeted them was both magnificent and terrifying, a display of power and malevolence that exceeded their worst fears, while also confirming their deepest suspicions about the true nature of their invitation. The court of Xibalba was vast beyond imagining, carved from black stone that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, decorated with symbols and images that hurt the eyes to look upon directly. Massive columns rose to support a ceiling lost in shadows, and from the walls hung banners and trophies that spoke of countless victories over mortal heroes who had dared to challenge the power of death. At the center of this awesome space sat the lords of Xibalba themselves, arranged in a hierarchy that reflected their various specializations in bringing suffering and despair to the world above. 1 death and 7 death occupied thrones carved from single pieces of obsidian, their forms shifting and changing in ways that made it impossible to look at them directly for more than a moment. Around them sat their terrible servants, each one a master of some particular form of misery and destruction. But the brothers were not given time to fully absorb the implications of what they were seeing. As soon as they entered the court, they were subjected to the first of the trials that would test their wisdom as much as their courage. They were invited to sit, but the seats offered to them were nothing but heated stones that would have burned them severely. They were offered food and drink, but the sustenance provided was nothing but ash and blood, corruption disguised as hospitality. Each test was designed not just to cause physical harm, but to reveal the brothers' ignorance of the true rules that governed existence in the underworld. Here, appearances were always deceptive, gifts were always curses in disguise, and trust was always a mistake that would be punished with extreme prejudice. The lords of Xibalba were not just testing the brothers' ball-playing skills, but their fundamental understanding of the nature of reality itself. The brothers, for all their earthly wisdom and cosmic awareness, found themselves ill-equipped for these challenges. Their experience had taught them to trust in the basic goodness of existence, to expect that skill and good intentions would be rewarded, to believe that the universe was fundamentally hospitable to conscious beings who approached it with respect and understanding. These assumptions, which had served them well in the world above, proved to be dangerous liabilities in the realm of the lords of death. They failed test after test, falling into trap after trap, each failure diminishing not just their confidence, but their very essence as beings of light and life. The lords of Xibalba watched their struggles with cruel amusement, savoring each moment of confusion and despair, each small victory of darkness over the presumptuous representatives of the world above. When the time finally came for the actual ball game that had ostensibly been the reason for their invitation, the brothers found themselves weakened and disoriented, their usual coordination disrupted by the trials they had endured, their spirits dampened by the constant atmosphere of malevolence and deception that surrounded them. The ball court of Xibalba was unlike any they had ever played in. Its walls were lined with knives and spikes, its floor was uneven and treacherous, and the ball itself seemed to have a malevolent life of its own, bouncing in unpredictable directions that defied all the laws of physics they had learned to depend upon. The game that followed was less a competition than an execution, a ritualized demonstration of the power of death over life, chaos over order, despair over hope. No matter how skillfully the brothers played, no matter how desperately they called upon all their experience and training, they found themselves unable to compete effectively against opponents who could change the rules at will, who could manipulate the very nature of reality to ensure their own victory. In the end, Hun and Vukub were defeated not by superior skill, but by the fundamental dishonesty that governed all activities in the underworld. They were sacrificed according to the dark rituals of Xibalba, their bodies dismembered and their remains scattered as trophies of the Lord's victory over the presumptuous mortals who had dared to challenge their authority. But even in death, even in apparent total defeat, the brothers achieved something that the lords of Xibalba had not anticipated. Their sacrifice was not just an ending, but a beginning, not just a victory for darkness, but a seed of future light. For their courage in accepting the challenge, their skill in the sacred game, and most importantly, their willingness to risk everything for the sake of cosmic play, had established them as heroes whose story would inspire future generations. Their mother, grieving but not broken by the loss of her sons, preserved their memory, and their equipment, keeping alive the hope that their sacrifice had not been meaningless, that somehow their defeat would lead to ultimate victory. She did not know that she was already carrying within her womb the seeds of that victory. Twin sons who would inherit not just their father S and uncle S skill at the ball game, but their courage, their determination, and most importantly, their understanding that some challenges must be faced regardless of the likelihood of success. The lords of Xibalba celebrated their victory with cruel feasting and dark ceremonies, believing that they had permanently established their supremacy over the forces of life and light. They had proven that mortal skill was no match for divine malevolence, that courage was no protection against overwhelming power, that the proper relationship between the world above and the world below was one of fear and submission. But the cosmic patterns that govern all existence are more complex and more resilient than even the lords of death fully understood. Every ending contains the seeds of a new beginning. Every death makes space for new life. Every apparent victory of darkness only intensifies the eventual triumph of light. The sacrifice of Hun and Vukub had set in motion forces that would ultimately prove more powerful than all the malevolence of Xibalba. Forces that would give birth to heroes capable of avenging their fathers and uncles, of challenging the lords of death on their own ground, and of establishing once and for all the proper relationship between mortality and the cosmic forces that govern existence. As the echoes of their final defeat faded into the darkness of the underworld, as their names were added to the grim catalogue of heroes who had fallen to the power of Xibalba, the stage was being set for the next movement in this cosmic drama. The pattern had been established: challenge, defeat, sacrifice, and the promise of eventual redemption. The lords of death had won this battle, but the war between light and darkness, life and death, hope and despair was far from over. The sacrifice of Hun and Vukub echoed through the cosmos like a bell tolling in an empty cathedral, its reverberations touching every level of existence and setting in motion the mysterious forces that govern death and rebirth, ending and beginning the eternal cycle of creation that ensures no defeat is ever truly final. But this echo was not just a sound, it was a call, a summons, an invitation to new life that would answer the challenge of death with powers the lords of Xibalba had never imagined possible. In the world above, where the sun still rose and set in its eternal rhythm, where corn still grew in terraced fields and children still played in temple courtyards, the mother of the fallen heroes received a visitation that would change the course of cosmic history. She had been living in quiet grief, tending the shrine where her son's ballgame equipment was preserved, offering prayers and copal incense for the peace of their spirits, trying to find meaning in a loss that seemed to mock everything she had believed about justice and divine providence. But on a day when the morning mist clung longer than usual to the temple pyramids, when the very air seemed to shimmer with possibilities just beyond the reach of ordinary perception, she encountered a being unlike any she had ever seen before. This was one of the lords of Xibalba, but not one of the terrible death gods who had destroyed her sons. This was a different kind of underworld power, a figure whose very presence suggested that the realm of death was more complex and more mysterious than she had ever imagined. The being appeared to her as she was walking through the forest, gathering the flowers and herbs she used in her daily offerings for the dead. At first, she thought it might be a tree. Its form was tall and still, its surface textured like bark, its presence so subtle that it seemed to blend into the forest background. But as she approached, she realized that this was no ordinary tree, but a living being of such strange beauty that her breath caught in her throat. It was Hun, her son, but transformed by his passage through death into something that was no longer quite human, and yet more human than any mortal being she had ever encountered. His body had become part of the cosmic tree that connected all levels of existence, his head crowned with flowers and fruit, his voice speaking from within the living wood with a resonance that seemed to come from the heart of the earth itself. "Mother," he said, and his voice was like wind in leaves, like water over stone, like the sound of seeds splitting open in fertile soil. "Do not grieve for what was lost, but rejoice in what is to come. Death is not an ending, but a transformation, not a defeat, but a doorway to possibilities that life alone cannot contain." She approached with the mixture of wonder and terror that mortals feel when confronted with the truly sacred understanding. Instinctively, that she was in the presence of mystery beyond her comprehension, but also recognizing in this transformed being the essence of the son she had loved and lost. He was himself, and yet more than himself, individual, and yet part of something vast and cosmic, dead and yet more alive than she had ever seen him. "What has happened to you?" she whispered, reaching out to touch the bark-like surface of his transformed body, feeling beneath her fingers the pulse of sap and the movement of life forces that connected him to every growing thing in the forest. "We have learned what the lords of Xibalba did not want us to learn," he replied, his voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate in her bones, in the deep places of her body, where new life was already stirring. "We have discovered that their power over death is not absolute, that consciousness can survive transformation, that love is stronger than fear, and hope more enduring than despair." As he spoke, she became aware of changes in her own body. subtle at first, but growing stronger with each word he uttered. Life was quickening within her, not the ordinary life that comes from union between man and woman, but the miraculous life that springs from the meeting of mortal love and cosmic necessity. The life that is born when the universe requires heroes and provides them through means that transcend ordinary causation. You will bear sons, Hun told her, his transformed features expressing a joy that was both utterly human and utterly divine. Twins who will inherit our skills and our courage, but also our knowledge of what lies beyond the boundaries of ordinary existence. They will avenge our defeat and transform it into victory, will challenge the lords of Xibalba with wisdom we did not possess, will establish once and for all the proper relationship between life and death, light and darkness, hope and despair. The conception that occurred in that forest clearing was unlike any other in the history of the world. It required no physical union, no meeting of flesh and flesh, but was accomplished through the power of word and intention, through the force of love that connects all beings across the boundaries of life and death, through the cosmic necessity that ensures the universe will always provide what is needed for the continuation of consciousness and the ultimate triumph of light. As the miraculous pregnancy progressed, it became clear that these would be no ordinary children. The mother could feel them moving within her womb with a coordination and purpose that suggested they were already aware of their destiny, already preparing for the challenges that awaited them. They seemed to communicate with each other in a language of movement and rhythm, practicing the cosmic dance that would serve them well in their future confrontations with the forces of darkness. The very fact of their existence sent ripples of unease through the underworld. The lords of Xibalba, who had been celebrating their victory over Hun and Vukub, began to sense that their triumph might not be as complete as they had believed. Oracles and signs pointed to the coming of new heroes, beings who would inherit the skills of their predecessors, but also possess knowledge and powers that would make them far more dangerous to the established order of things. But the lords of death, for all their cunning and malevolence, could not prevent what was already in motion. The cosmic forces that govern rebirth and renewal are older and more powerful than even the most ancient of the underworld powers. And when the universe requires heroes, it will find ways to create them that transcend all the schemes and obstacles that darkness can devise. The birth of the twins was attended by portents and wonders that announced to all who could read such signs that something of cosmic significance was occurring. The aurora danced in skies too far south for such phenomena. Flowers bloomed out of season with colors that had never been seen before, and the very stones seemed to sing with harmonies that touched the hearts of all who heard them. Birds gathered in vast flocks and flew in patterns that spelled out messages in ancient script, while deer and jaguars emerged from the forest to stand witness to the arrival of beings whose destiny would affect every living creature. When the twins finally emerged into the light of the world, they brought with them clear evidence of their divine heritage and cosmic purpose. They were born clutching rubber balls in their tiny fists, their eyes already focused with an awareness that belonged to much older souls. Their movements coordinated in ways that suggested they had been practicing together for far longer than the months of gestation could account for. Their names came to their mother in dreams and visions, named for his father and carrying within that name all the hope and courage that had led to sacrifice and transformation, and whose name meant jaguar sun and suggested the fierce power that would be needed to confront the lords of darkness on their own ground. These names were not just labels, but prophecies, cosmic signatures that announced the roles these children would play in the great drama of existence. From their earliest days, it was clear that these twins possessed abilities that set them apart from all other children. They could speak almost from birth, but their first words were not the simple requests for food and comfort that mark ordinary infancy. Instead, they spoke of cosmic patterns and celestial movements, of the proper relationships between different levels of existence, of strategies for confronting challenges that would not arise until they reached maturity. They grew with supernatural speed, not just physically, but in wisdom and understanding, while other children were learning to walk and talk and were mastering the complex mathematics of the ballgame, studying the movements of planets and stars, learning to read the subtle signs that reveal the presence of spiritual forces in the material world. But perhaps most remarkably, they seemed to be in constant communication with their father and uncle, receiving guidance and instruction from the transformed spirits of Hun and Vukub. They would often be found sitting quietly in the forest, apparently listening to voices that others could not hear, asking questions and receiving answers that prepared them for challenges that had not yet manifested in the physical world. Their training was unlike anything that had ever been attempted before. It encompassed not just the physical skills needed for excellence in the ballgame, but the spiritual disciplines required for traveling between different levels of existence, the psychological preparation necessary for confronting beings whose very presence could drive mortals insane with fear, and the cosmic awareness that would allow them to understand the true nature of their mission. They learned to see through illusions and deceptions, to recognize truth even when it was disguised as lie, to maintain hope even in the depths of apparent despair. They studied the weaknesses of the lords of Xibalba, understanding that each of these terrible beings was ultimately limited by the very specialization that gave them their power. They learned to transform fear into determination, anger into wisdom, despair into the fuel for transcendence. Most importantly, they learned that their mission was not just personal revenge for their father S and uncle S death, but cosmic necessity, a restoration of balance that would affect the destiny of all conscious beings. The lords of Xibalba had overreached themselves in their victory, had claimed a dominion over life and death that properly belonged to the creative forces of the universe. Their defeat was required not just for justice, but for the proper functioning of existence itself. As the twins approached maturity, as their skills reached levels that surpassed even those of their legendary predecessors, as their understanding of cosmic principles deepened beyond anything that mortals had ever achieved before, the stage was set for the next movement in this vast drama. They would soon receive their own invitation to Xibalba, their own challenge from the Lords of Death, their own opportunity to confront the forces that had destroyed their father and uncle. But they would not go as Hun and Vukub had gone, with skill and courage, but ultimately with innocence about the true nature of what they faced, and would descend into the underworld armed, not just with superior abilities, but with wisdom earned through the sacrifice of those who had gone before them, with knowledge of their enemies' weaknesses, and most importantly, with a clear understanding of what victory would require, and what defeat would mean for all future existence. The lords of Xibalba, sensing the approach of these new challengers, began their own preparations for what would prove to be the ultimate test of their power. They understood instinctively that this confrontation would be different from all previous encounters with mortal heroes, that these twins represented a threat unlike any they had faced before. The very fabric of their realm seemed to tremble with anticipation of the coming conflict, as if the underworld itself recognized that its fundamental nature might be about to change forever. The stage was set for the greatest ball game in cosmic history, a match that would determine not just the fate of individual heroes, but the proper relationship between all the forces that govern existence. The Lords of Death and the Champions of Life were about to meet in a confrontation that would shake the foundations of reality itself and establish patterns that would echo through all subsequent time. The twins grew in wisdom and power with each passing season, their abilities developing along paths that sometimes amazed even their transformed father and uncle, who watched their progress from the liminal realm between life and death where they now dwelt, and were not content to simply master the skills that had made their predecessors famous. They sought to transcend those abilities, to develop new approaches to the cosmic challenges that awaited them, to become something unprecedented in the long history of heroes who had dared to challenge the Lords of Darkness. Their days were filled with training that encompassed every aspect of existence, physical, mental, and spiritual. In the morning hours, when dew still clung to the leaves and the air was sweet with the perfume of night-blooming flowers, they practiced the ball game with an intensity that bordered on obsession. But their practice was different from the joyous competition that had characterized their Father S and Uncle S play. Every movement was calculated, every technique refined for maximum effectiveness against opponents who could manipulate the very laws of physics to ensure their own victory. They developed strategies that had never been attempted before, ways of playing that took into account the fundamental dishonesty that governed all activities in Xibalba. They learned to anticipate deception, to counter treachery with cleverness, to use their opponent's own malevolence against them. Most importantly, they learned to find victory not through superior force, but through superior understanding, recognizing that the Lords of Death were ultimately bound by the same cosmic patterns that governed all existence patterns that could be used against them by those wise enough to perceive their true nature. In the afternoon hours, when the sun stood high overhead and shadows lay sharp and black against the temple stones, the twins studied the deeper mysteries of existence. They learned to travel in spirit while their bodies remained in the physical world, exploring the various levels of reality and mapping the territories they would need to navigate when they finally descended to Xibalba, in flesh as well as consciousness. These spiritual journeys revealed to them the true complexity of the underworld, its geography and politics, the relationships between different types of Death Lords, and the specific vulnerabilities that each possessed. They discovered that Xibalba was not the monolithic realm of evil they had initially imagined, but a complex society with its own internal conflicts and contradictions, factions and rivalries that could potentially be exploited by clever opponents. They learned the names and specializations of every Lord of Death, understanding that beings like Scab, Stripper, and Bloodgatherer Wing and Packstrap, Demon of Pus, and Demon of Jaundice, were powerful but also limited, capable of extraordinary malevolence within their particular domains, but vulnerable outside their areas of expertise. More importantly, they began to understand that these lords were not truly immortal, but dependent on the fear and despair they generated in others, weakening whenever their victims refused to be intimidated by their power. In the evening hours, when the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky, and the air filled with the sounds of creatures beginning their nocturnal activities, the twins practiced the arts of transformation and disguise that would prove crucial to their ultimate success. They learned to change their appearance at will, to take on the forms of insects and animals, to become invisible when necessary, or to appear as completely different beings when circumstances required deception. These skills went far beyond simple shapeshifting. They represented a fundamental understanding of the fluid nature of identity itself, the recognition that consciousness was not limited to any particular physical form, but could adapt and change as circumstances required. This understanding would prove essential when they faced the lords of Xibalba, beings who were themselves masters of transformation and illusion. But perhaps most importantly, the twins learned to work together with a unity that transcended ordinary cooperation. They developed a form of shared consciousness that allowed them to coordinate their actions with perfect precision, to communicate without words, to anticipate each other's needs and responses with supernatural accuracy. They became, in essence, two aspects of a single heroic identity, capable of being in multiple places simultaneously, and of approaching problems from complementary angles that multiplied their individual effectiveness exponentially. This unity was not just tactical, but spiritual, reflecting their understanding that the challenges they would face required not just individual courage, but collective wisdom, not just personal skill, but communal strength. They embodied the principle that consciousness, at its highest levels, transcends the boundaries of individual identity and becomes something greater than the sum of its parts. As their training progressed and their abilities reached levels that surpassed even the legendary heroes of previous ages, strange phenomena began to manifest around them. The very air seemed to shimmer when they moved, as if reality itself were adjusting to accommodate their presence. Animals gathered to watch their practice sessions, sitting in perfect stillness, as if they understood that they were witnessing something of cosmic significance. Even the stones beneath their feet seemed to resonate with harmonies that reflected the growing power of their coordinated movements. The lords of Xibalba, monitoring these developments through their network of spies and omens, grew increasingly uneasy. Reports reached them of mortals whose abilities seemed to transcend the normal limitations of human existence, whose very presence seemed to strengthen the forces of light and weaken the influence of darkness. The comfortable certainty they had felt after their victory over Hun and Vucub began to erode, replaced by a growing awareness that they might be facing opponents unlike any they had encountered before. But the Lords of Death were not prepared to abandon their dominion without a fight. They began to make their own preparations for the coming confrontation, marshaling all their resources and devising new forms of trial and torment that would surely overwhelm even the most exceptional mortal heroes. They created new monsters and terrors, designed new forms of psychological torture, prepared weapons and strategies that they believed would prove irresistible to any earthly opponents. Their confidence was not entirely misplaced. They were, after all, cosmic forces of enormous antiquity and power beings who had existed since the first conscious creature learned to fear death, who had accumulated eons of experience in breaking the spirits of those who dared to challenge their authority. They had defeated countless heroes before, each one of whom had believed themselves to be uniquely prepared for the trials of the underworld. But what the lords of Xibalba did not fully comprehend was that Anne represented something genuinely new in the cosmic order. Not just more skillful heroes, but heroes who understood the fundamental nature of heroism itself, who recognized that true victory could not be achieved through force alone, but required a transformation of the very rules that governed the conflict between light and darkness. The twins had learned from the sacrifice of their father and uncle that the traditional approach to heroism, courage, skill, and righteous anger, was insufficient when facing opponents who could manipulate the very nature of reality to ensure their own victory. They had developed instead a new form of heroism based on wisdom, adaptability, and most importantly, the recognition that sometimes the greatest victory comes not from defeating one's enemies, but from transforming them, not from destroying darkness, but from converting it into light. As they prepared for their inevitable confrontation with the lords of death, the twins knew that they would be entering a realm where all the normal rules were suspended, where appearance and reality bore no necessary relationship to each other, where survival would depend not just on their abilities, but on their understanding of cosmic principles that most heroes never even suspected existed. They would need to be warriors and tricksters, athletes and philosophers, individuals and a unified force, mortal beings capable of transcending mortality itself. They would need to defeat the lords of Xibalba, not just in the ball game that had destroyed their predecessors, but in the deeper game of cosmic significance, the eternal struggle between consciousness and chaos, meaning and meaninglessness, hope and despair. The world itself seemed to hold its breath as these preparations neared completion, as if all of existence understood that the coming confrontation would determine the fundamental nature of reality for all future ages. The very stones of the temples seemed to vibrate with anticipation. The stars appeared to pulse in rhythm with the twins' heartbeats, and the wind carried whispers of prophecy and promise that touched the dreams of every living creature. Soon, very soon, the lords of Xibalba would extend their invitation, and would accept it with the full knowledge of what such acceptance meant. They would descend into the underworld, not as the confident but naive heroes their father and uncle had been, but as transformed beings capable of meeting darkness on its own terms and emerging victorious through means that darkness could neither anticipate nor understand. The greatest game in cosmic history was about to begin, and for the first time since the creation of the world, the lords of death would face opponents who truly understood the stakes involved and possessed the wisdom necessary to achieve not just personal victory, but cosmic transformation.